So, hello everyone. It's 3 p.m. UTC, 5 p.m. Central European Summertime, and welcome to all of you attending this webinar. Please, short confirmation if the audio is good on your side, and then we can get started for this webinar. And I see a confirmation that audio is working fine. So we are ready for this webinar, The World of Web. And this goal of this webinar is an introduction to TMS WEB Core to create web applications from Delphi. We'll start from the basics. We deal with the basics. And of course, this is also meant to be a highly interactive webinar. So if you have any questions during this webinar, feel free to post your questions in the chat box. I'll have a look at it and I'll try to answer these as good as possible. So web applications, it's about software that is running everywhere. I think these days, literally every electronic device is able to work with web applications through a modern web browser. And here on this slide, I have a couple of devices that all can access the web, going from iPhone, Android phones, Windows, PCs, laptops, Chromebooks, etc. And I even have a funny anecdote that a couple of years ago, I was by coincidence in a Tesla car, and the Tesla car also has a browser on board in the dashboard of the Tesla. And even there, I was able to open up a TMS WEB Core application. So even on the road in your car, you can use this kind of applications. And this webinar, the goal of this webinar is to introduce you to TMS WEB Core, especially if as a Delphi developer, you are coming from a VCL Windows application development background. And that's why I'll like to start with comparing a little bit the difference between creating native VCL Windows applications with Delphi and creating web applications. If we talk about native applications, then what is happening is that the Object Pascal language is compiled, translated to a native binary executable that targets the operating system. In the web, on the other side, a web application runs in the browser, and the browser deals with HTML, with JavaScript, and with CSS to make an application running in the browser. I see a question here that if the webinar is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, so without any unexpected issues, you will also be able to see the replay a little bit later. Okay, but let's continue. So comparing native applications versus web applications, whereas in the native world, the application will do its tasks via using the operating system API, using the operating system file system. And in the case of Delphi, that is meanwhile the Windows operating system, but also Mac, Linux, Android, and iOS. In the browser for web applications here, our operating system, so to speak, is the browser. And we do everything in that application via the browser DOM, and also using the browser APIs, the JavaScript APIs for accessing all kinds of functionality. Whereas the application in the native world is delivered by an executable file on the file system, in the web world, our application, so to speak, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript is delivered from a server. And these days, almost all browsers will require that you deliver this via an HTTPS server for security. The user interface of web applications is created via HTML and CSS. We know that in a native application, native Delphi application, that is achieved for VCL applications by wrapping Windows APIs to do GDI or GDI plus drawing. For FireMonkey, that's a little bit more complex and involved, but we have the FireMonkey APIs that allow us to draw on the specific or using the underlying specific operating system APIs. But in the web world, every browser supports rendering the user interface via HTML and CSS. Meanwhile, HTML version 5 and CSS version 3. What has significantly evolved in the past couple of years is hardware access for our web applications running in the browser. When you run an application natively on a device, there is no doubt you can access all the hardware on your device. And that was not, at least like 10 years ago, the case when you were running a web application in the browser. But as I mentioned, meanwhile, this has progressively been added, and at this moment you can easily access the camera. You can deal with touch. You can also have multi-monitor support. The other icon stands for location, so you can use an onboard GPS device if the device supports it, of course, and the same applies for a compass to get the orientation of the device. What was also added, not yet in all the browsers, Safari here is a little bit behind, that is support for accessing USB devices. So the browser exposes an API to directly work or communicate through USB devices, and the same applies to Bluetooth. Also there, Safari is unfortunately a little bit behind, but Bluetooth access, and actually if everything works out well, you will see that live here during this webinar that we will use Bluetooth from a web application. And then the other's microphone is obviously also usable from a web application. The other icon is an NFC tag. So scanning NFC tags is in particular on Android devices also possible, and accessing our battery, that is the status of the battery, is also among the possibilities for hardware access, meanwhile in web applications running in the browser. Another important topic here is database access. And in an VCL or a FireMonkey application running natively on a system, you can access a local database, on a database that will be physically on the device where your application is running, or a database that you access through the network. But for a web application, that is quite different, because obviously you cannot expect that the database will be running local on the system where the user is working via the browser. Here, typically, we have a central database on a server and the web application working with the data in that database via a REST API. So the REST API is used by the web application to perform HTTP get, put, post, delete requests to get and update and delete data and so on. If we talk about REST APIs, for us as Delphi developers, there are a lot of possibilities to create such a REST API. Our own TMS Xdata is among possible solutions, but you can also use something like WebBroker or Embarcadero Red Server and several others, other open source tools, etc., to create a REST API to access your data on the central server. And obviously, that REST API will also be the guard for ensuring that only people with the right credentials, with the right authentication and authorization, will be able to access that data via the REST API. Now, we are getting a little bit more technical to see how we actually create such a web application running in the browser from the Delphi IDE. And so here you can see the different parts that accomplish this. What is happening is that we transpile the Object Pascal code to JavaScript, because obviously what's running in the browser is JavaScript code. So we actually transpile your application Object Pascal code to JavaScript. And we do that via the Past2JS open source compiler. You can, if you compare that to the VCL world, that's the equivalent of the DCC32 or DCC64 compiler. The Past2JS open source compiler is actually related to the FPC compiler, the free Pascal compiler. It actually uses the parser from the FPC compiler, so that guarantees a high level of code compatibility with Delphi code. There is, of course, other than the framework, also the RTL. And here the RTL is also provided by the Past2JS part. Here the goal was and remains to offer an RTL that is nearly the same as the Delphi RTL. A few exceptions exist, of course, because the Delphi RTL is supposed to be running on a Windows or a native operating system, while, of course, the RTL for the Past2JS targets a web application running in the browser. Whereas in a native application, you will use the VCL framework or the FireMonkey framework to create your user interface. We have tried to create the equivalent of a VCL framework for the web, and that is the TMS WEB Core framework. And of course, bringing all that together in the Delphi IDE, having a form designer, launching the compiler from the IDE, facilitate the debugging and so on, is of course also an important part of what the entire WEB Core offers for you. And here it is a little bit explained in a more diagram way. We see everything starts with the Pascal to JavaScript compiler. Some prefer to call this transpiler. You can choose what you like the most or what you find the most applicable. But the main thing is getting from Object Pascal to JavaScript running in the browser. And on top of that, we have the RTL, for example, the functions that allow you to work with dates and times, etc. But also, just like you have in a VCL application, access to the Windows API, here the operating system is the browser. So we also offer you access to the API of the browser, the web API. And also there is a way to mix and match with direct other parts of JavaScript code. And on top of that, we have our component framework that allows you to create not only the user interface, but also non-visual components like you have in a Delphi VCL or FireMonkey application, and also components to access via a REST API servers like an Xdata server, WebBroker, Embarcadero Red server, and so on. And on top of that are the controls. And so we have standard controls. Here, it was always our goal and aim to create controls that are as close as possible to the VCL controls to give you a high degree of familiarity with the framework directly out of the box. So there is a T-Web edit that is an equivalent of T-edit, the T-Web button that is an equivalent of the VCL T button, and so on. In addition to that, for more complex controls, you also have jQuery controls. And last but not least, we have also done the necessary work to make FNC controls work in a web core application. I'll show you that in a moment when demoing everything. And also here you see the logos of both the Delphi logo and the Visual Studio Code logo. And that means that you can use web core out of the Delphi IDE, but we also enabled you to use it out of the Visual Studio Code IDE. What kind of applications can we create with TMS WEB Core? I identified 3 main types of applications that we can create. The standard application that we create is a single page web application. The naming is not something that I or we have chosen. That is a common name that was starting to be used by the people who use frameworks like React or Vue or Angular. Then that name became kind of familiar used. And it's not to be confused with an application that can have only one form. No. The reason why it is called single page application is because the application is launched from a single URL. And so from that same URL, you can launch different forms, but you remain within the scope of that single URL. And that's the reason for calling this an SPA. A next type of application that's more like a next level on top of the SPA, that is a progressive web application. With that terminology is meant a web application that behaves properly on a multitude of devices, going from small screen mobile devices to larger screen desktop devices. And it brings a couple of other benefits. That is that a progressive web application is installable on the device. So the browser takes care of actually using the concept of caching this application. And you can invoke this application directly from the device, so even when you are offline, and it offers a couple of offline capabilities. And in that way, it operates nearly in the same way as a native application, and it's often hard to distinguish between a progressive web application and a native application. And a last type of web applications that is not really web applications, but uses web technology, is a Miletus application that is also possible to create from TMS WEB Core. You create an executable with a user interface that is based on web technology. And Miletus offers you also the APIs, the gateway to access operating system functionality, such as, for example, the file system. So whereas a regular web application is, of course, not able to access the local file system, that would be a very, very serious security breach if that would be possible. But if you want to take advantage of the nice things that come with HTML and CSS for rendering nice user interfaces, but you still want to have access to, for example, the local file system, then Miletus is a nice technology to have a look at. Actually, to have an example of a Miletus application, we have our TMS dashboard. That is the application that you can use to manage the products that you purchased and manage installing these applications from our dashboard and also updating them from the dashboard. That is using this Miletus technology. Reason for using that is, of course, that the user interface is HTML, CSS based. It's quite easy to do that in a responsive way. and take advantage of the nice things that you can achieve with HTML and CSS. Another next important part of software development is, of course, the debugging. If we look at debugging, so the situation is that your application will run in the browser as JavaScript, and so obviously you can debug your application by inspecting the JavaScript code that runs and step through it, etc. But on top of that, as for us Delphi developers, it's not always convenient to see the translated JavaScript code. We can also debug directly using the Pascal code in the browser console. That is possible on the Chrome browser, Edge Chromium, and also the Firefox browser. And so here you can go step by step through the code in the browser with Pascal, and you see the code as it was created in your application. And finally, what we also enabled is to allow you to debug from the Delphi IDE itself. And then, of course, the browser is running, but interrupted by the Delphi IDE during the debugging process. And from there, you can inspect and step through the codes, etc. So enough talked. I think you're all more excited about me demoing all kinds of things. So this is what we have prepared for you. The first basic steps and explaining the architecture and everything that is involved with a web application created with TMS WEB Core, what to do for deploying these web applications, how we can do the debugging, several aspects of user interface building with TMS WEB Core, how we can access a database, and finally also how we can do hardware access. And if everything works well, today we will be demonstrating the use of Bluetooth from a WEB Core application. So let's fire up the IDE. Here we have Delphi 12.3, and let's start by having a look. Here I have TMS WEB Core installed. So we go to installed packages, and here we see the three parts of TMS WEB Core that are installed. And that means that from that moment on, we have this toolbar. So this toolbar comes with TMS WEB Core, and we have new application types that we can create. Here you see that we have different types: a regular TMS WEB Core web application, that is the typical SPA application. We have a web core application that uses the Bootstrap library. For people not familiar with Bootstrap, Bootstrap is a very popular and widely used CSS library for customizing the look and feel of your web pages and the HTML elements on that web page with lots of, meanwhile, commonly accepted styles. We'll have a look at that in a moment. An Electron application is a native application with web technology, is quite similar to a Miletus application, with the important difference that an Electron application, when you create that native application, Electron applications also deploy the complete browser engine. And that makes the deployment quite large. For a Miletus application, here we directly take advantage of the installed browser engine components in the operating system. A Miletus application is cross-platform. You can run it on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And on each of these operating systems, it will just use the browser engine that is already pre-installed or part of the operating systems, making the executable way smaller than an Electron application to deploy, and also having the advantage that the operating system is performing regular updates of your browser for security reasons, so your Miletus application will also automatically take advantage of that. And then we have the progressive web applications, so the web applications that can be cached locally installed on your device, directly also offline, launched from your device. This is what you can create with the TMS PWA application. And finally, we also have a unit testing framework, so you can also perform unit testing. You can create a console application, so that's maybe more for testing code than anything you will use in real life. And a web package. A web package is a package with which you can install your own components in TMS WEB Core. Let's start with a regular application that I have here now on the form. And what I will do is save this application somewhere so we can have a look at what exact files are involved for this application. And so let's create here under projects, under webinar, and I create a new folder, web, and here we create another new folder, and that is SPA. And let's save all files involved. Okay, if we have a look at here the project manager, we can see that here we have a web application, and the parts that come standard with it are the icon, the fav icon, and that is the icon that will be used in the browser that is associated with your web application and a kind of recognizability for your web application. And such a standard icon is included by default in your WEB Core application. Then we have the project CSS file, which is by default an empty file, but you can add your own classes here. For example, red div, and I set here background color red. This way I can add all kinds of CSS that can be used in my application. The project HTML file, that is the HTML file through which your application is started. And this is also the default structure of the HTML file that actually launches your application. And you can see here the reference to the main JavaScript file, call it the equivalent of your executable, and that is what is used to run your application. You can see this is included as a script reference. You can also see that the CSS is included and as a reference, and you can see that the application is executed by here the RTL.run. That is what launches your application in the browser. And then we have the first form in your application, just like for a VCL application. And you can see here that we have our first form descending from the web form. And we can add controls on this form, for example, a web button and web edit. And for example, also a web list box like that. And let's maybe make our first typical application. Okay, and what I do here is I change the caption to add, and let's have a handler. So what I will do is copy the content of the edit control and add it to the list box. So here I grab the content of that edit control and use web listbox.items.add from that value. Okay, so you see very, very similar to creating a VCL application. Let's run this application. So now the compiler was invoked to convert this into JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and run that application in the browser. It is running through a local web server. So here you see the web server. This is the icon. Let's open it up. So here, this is a little web server running in the background, and that is responsible for hosting this web application. That is for debugging purposes, for running locally, but not really meant to actually run that web server for a public-facing website. And if I would add, for example, Bruno to the edit control, you will see that it is added to the list box, the expected behavior. So now let's have a look at the files that are involved. So you have an idea of what to deploy when you want to put that application. And I think it was under webinar, wasn't it? Yes, SPA. Okay, so here we have the structure of our project. And here we have the TMS web folder. I compiled in debug mode, so my files were generated in the debug folder. And if I have a look under that folder, here are the necessary files for our web application. So as expected, the favicon icon, the project CSS file, project HTML file, through which our application is launched, and the project JavaScript file. So this is the entire application with JavaScript. And here we have the JavaScript map file. And this is actually the file that contains the translation between JavaScript and Pascal code. And that is the file that is responsible for allowing you to see and debug the Object Pascal code in the browser console. And this is the HTML file for your first form. So if you would deploy these files on a web server, that is all you need to do to have that application running from your server. Let's have a look at debugging. So I opened up the browser console with the F12 key. That is the shortcut key for that. And as you can see here, you see the Object Pascal code for that form. You can also see the JavaScript code. So if you want, you can also access all the code via JavaScript. But of course, we are more familiar with the Pascal code. And from here, you can set a breakpoint like this. And if I would now change that to Joe, click the Add button, you can see, well, here I have debugging enabled also in my IDE. And I had a breakpoint set here on this line of code. So here it jumped into my IDE. And so here I can now also debug from my IDE. And here you can see if I hover over this variable, you can see the content that I entered in my edit control. Actually, you can select that. You can choose whether you enable debugging from the IDE or not, and that is done under the TMS WEB Core options. So if we go to TMS Web options, let's click options, and here enable debugging inside the IDE. That is now set to true, and so that allows you, that will allow you to debug from the IDE and set breakpoints in your Delphi IDE. And these breakpoints will be triggered. Your IDE will stop. Your web application will stop until, of course, you keep running from the Delphi IDE. But with this setting, you can allow or not allow this. I see a question, should the map file be deployed or is it only for debugging? Well, a very good question. I think that a map file should never be deployed as part of your final application that you will release. Note also that here I have enabled by default the debug mode. Well, maybe let's just first keep running that application. okay, and maybe I'll stop this application. And what I will do is switch now to release mode. And let's run this application again. And let's have a look at the files that were created in release mode. Here you can see that the, and I see that, okay, the browser was triggered on my other screen, but here it is. So now my application is running in release mode, and what you see, files to deploy in release mode, here there is no map file. And that means that your customers, your users, will not be able to see the object Pascal code. The only thing that they will be able to see is the JavaScript code. Let's have a look at the debug file. You can see also here that the project.js file is something like 2 megabytes here when it is created for debug mode. So for release mode, it is only 365K. And so also that is an obvious reason for choosing the release mode. I would say a release mode is a must for deploying your applications on the web. If you put just these files on a web server, that is sufficient for running it. Also important is here, you see this is the generated JavaScript code, and it's actually one long line of text that is achieved through the obfuscation step that was executed. So that's also a part of creating your application in release mode, that is the obfuscation. We use an open source popular tool, which is the Cursor tool. That's a commonly used open source obfuscator tool that is integrated within TMS WEB Core, is launched when you compile for the release mode. And so that is, let's say, the WEB Core application in its most optimal form to deploy on web server. And so with that, these already show the basics of how you create your application, how you can do your first debugging steps, and what to watch for when you want to deploy your applications to a web server. This set of files you can put on an IIS server, for example, on an Apache server. There's even, it was a very nice thing to have seen that there was even a customer who once deployed a WEB Core application on an Arduino head. So the head that had an integrated web server. And so he could deploy WEB Core files on that Arduino head, and with that have an application that was running from his Arduino web server. Another question that I see, project HTML, project 1 HTML, that we would typically rename to index.html. That is fully correct. And indeed, if we would rename it to index.html, that will allow to launch that application by just entering the URL with its folder name without specifying the HTML, as that is typically the default name to launch. So yes, you can use index.html for that convenience. All right, let's continue with now having a look at the user interface. I will close that application. Well, maybe what we will do is first have a look at the progressive web application. And I create a new progressive web application here with an PWA. And if we compare the content of this progressive web application with a regular SPA web application, we can see that a couple of files are added here in addition to the SPA application. And that is, to begin with, three PNG files, and these are the icons for our applications. The icons will actually be used to add these icons to the home screen of your device when you install the application on the device. So on an iPhone or Android phone, when you choose to install that application, then you will see what you specified here as icons in three different resolutions. Depending a little bit, your device will choose the resolution that fits best. And then we have the manifest.json file that is an automatically generated file, and that file is holding the settings for your PWA. And as you can see, these are all generated on the fly. This is part of the PWA specification that if to be recognized as a PWA application, it should have such a manifest.json file, as well as also have a service worker. The service worker is a typical part of an PWA application and is responsible for also caching all the files. But we generate that file automatically for you, so you do not really have to bother about this service worker JavaScript file, neither for this manifest JSON file. It, of course, becomes also a necessary file to deploy when you want to generate the PWA application. We have actually created a progressive web application and put it on our server, so you can actually play with it directly yourself. So when I launch it from here, that is a calculator application. And if you launch that URL, you should see it on your device, your PC, whatever. And here, this icon means that the browser detected that this is a valid progressive web application and that you can install it on your machine. And so it will, if I do that, it will create an icon on the desktop from where I can launch that calculator. If I would click that icon at a later time, even when I'm offline, it would still be able to launch that calculator application. And that actually also includes, for example, here we have a specific font that is used for the numbers in our calculator. That font is deployed through a font file along with the web application, is also cached. And so that means that even in an offline situation, it will still properly show that font. I invite you to launch that URL, especially from a mobile device. See, Android should automatically show some kind of pop-up suggesting that it can be added to the home screen. On an iOS device, you have this share icon from where you can also select that this application will be added to your device. And okay, that is about progressive web applications. Let's have a look now at user interface, but I'll first have a look at the chat box for questions. I see, is it possible to access database on multiple clients in a local network with Delphi Pro IDE with TMS WEB Core? So as explained in the first slides, when you want to access a central database, whether that database is local or on some public-facing server, you will typically want to access that database through a REST API. So you build a web broker, TMS Xdata. It can even be an ASP.NET, a Node.js, whatever technology that you use for creating a REST server. You create that REST server, and that REST server will be the gateway through which your web client application accesses that database, whether it's local or whether it's on a remote server. And of course, for example, if you create such an REST server with Xdata, Xdata is using FireDAC, for example, as a means to get to your database. And so any database you can work with through FireDAC, you can create with TMS Xdata a REST server to get access to that data. And the same actually applies to something like WebBroker or Embarcadero RED server. Another question that I see is, could you explain with the example project option automatically copied file extensions? My web page icons are not shown when compiling in Delphi, but show when I compile under Visual Studio Code. Okay, I think that this refers to, and if I create a new application, a TMS WEB Core application, and there is a configuration for setting what files will be sent or deployed to the release folder. And here, by default, it will deploy all HTML, CSS, .ico files, .gs files, all these file types, it will deploy to your release folder. And if I'm not wrong, I'm not sure if here is, you can do that at project level or also globally. That is here, add to this the extensions that you want TMS WEB Core, these files to be deployed to your output folder, to the release folder. So if I would, for example, add here in my project, let's say in file.sql that is not an already recognized file format, so it will not be automatically copied to the output release folder. If I would add that extension to this option setting, then if and that's important, that this file is actually added to your web project, so it should not just sit in the folder where your application is, it should be added to that project, and then when the extension is recognized, it will be sent to the output folder, the release folder. All right, what more do we have? Is it possible to create a pop-up form at runtime and position it in the center of the screen instead of the default corner position? So we have not touched multi-form yet, but there is a demo in TMS WEB Core that demonstrates exactly that, how we deal with multiple forms. And that is an example that you can find here under demo basics multi-form. And let's have a look at this application. So here we have form 1, and here we have form 2. And so we have a couple of different ways to create the second form. So if we have a look at the code, you can see here that we are creating the secondary form, and we are initializing a couple of properties from that form. And here we are setting what kind of border will be used for that form. And here, what is happening here is that the HTML that is associated with the second form is loaded, and here the form is actually executed as a model form, and we are waiting for that form to return from the model form. If I run this application, you will see what happens. So that's my application. I choose a pop-up form, and you can see here that this second form, when I choose this option, it is shown centered on top of my first form. When I close it again, it is of course disappearing, and my first form becomes active again. That is how you deal, or one possibility of how you deal with multiple forms. And then if you create a project with many pages, is there a best practice for how to organize your folder structure for the source code? One possibility here is where you have all forms in the same folder, same hierarchy, but nothing prevents you from creating a subfolder and adding other forms to such a subfolder. So I would say it depends on your personal preference, and it is actually similar to how you would do that in a VCL application. Let's move to user interface because I want to show you a couple of things with respect to user interfaces. And we will here first start by comparing a regular application and then move this to Bootstrap. So let's save this project and then we create a Bootstrap project. And that is, let's say, default. And let's save that project. Okay, and now what I will do is add a couple of controls, a list box, an edit control. Okay, is that okay? And that, no, I want for a button that will be a little bit better visible. Okay, so that's my application. I run my application. And what I actually see now is what is considered as a regular HTML look and feel. So you see that gray button, you see the edit control with focus border that is black, and this is basic plain HTML without any CSS. That is how it looks like. If I now add a new project and I select the second option, which is a Bootstrap web application, that's my second project, and I will save the project again in that same folder here under projects, webinar, web, and then we call this folder Bootstrap. Okay, and let's save all the files in that folder. So main difference here is by creating this type of project, you can already see two files that have been added. That is the Bootstrap JavaScript file and the Bootstrap CSS file. And that means when I now add controls on my form, and actually, let's see what happens because it does not seem to have picked up the Bootstrap style yet. Let's have a look. Here, my button. Okay, so it did not see it automatically, but when I change it now, and I will change it to BTN primary, I know that this is a classic Bootstrap CSS class name, and that gives you this kind of Bootstrap look and feel for your control. And here we can use form control, which is also what is a classic Bootstrap name for a CSS class for your control. You can see that now the borders of this control are a little bit lighter, and this is the classic Bootstrap look and feel. You can also see the highlight when focusing is completely different from standard HTML. And that is one way how you can create, I would say, nicer looking, modern looking web application through Bootstrap. And that is what we offer by creating a Bootstrap project. You can also go from an existing project and actually do these things yourself by right-clicking here, go to manage JavaScript libraries in the options, and then you get this dialog from where you can select the Bootstrap library of your choice among many other libraries that you can select for your project. And so this is already one step for creating a nicer look and feel for your applications. Now I will go one step further, and to show you that one step further, what I will do is again create a new application, because I will need some room for my application. So here it is. Let's make this a large form. Let's also again save our project. And what I will actually do now is get a little bit help from AI to help me create a web application faster. And here I will call this folder AI, and I save it to all files to this folder. And here on the WEB Core toolbar in your Delphi IDE, I can invoke the AI. And here you can give your prompt. Your prompt will specify what you expect the AI to generate, and it will then generate the HTML there. I created a somewhat longer prompt here, so I ask for a modern white and blue themed responsive design with a 3-panel layout. The panel should represent a business card with, in the top left corner, the placeholder for an image, and on the right side I want, and I can better write it in English, a title, and under the title I want notes. And the panel should also have a button with the caption select to have an actionable button on each panel. That is the prompt that I created, and I paste the prompt now in this dialog, and I execute it. I ask here, in this case, OpenAI. You can use also other AIs or LLMs for the generation of your HTML that is selectable, but here I use the default options, and it generated for me what I requested. What I do now is just copy and paste what it generated, and I will go to my HTML for my main form in my application, and just copy and paste this here for my form. And when I open this form in the designer, you can see that this is what OpenAI generated for me. And if we have a look, you can see that indeed it has this responsive behavior. And from here, we can start and further customize it, bind our data through these dialogues, and so on. But with the help of AI, we immediately get, I think, much faster than we can do ourselves to create nice looking user interfaces. Another thing that we can do with TMS WEB Core is integrate already pre-existing HTML and CSS code. The web is literally full of all kinds of examples, and I also prepared an example for you. And actually, it is an example from what I think is an interesting website, that is the uiverse.io website, where you can see you have a library of all kinds of elements that you can quickly also reuse in your applications. I picked one example, and that is this one. So I open this page, and here you can see a kind of sign-in dialog that, and actually this website offers free to use with no strings attached HTML and CSS that you can reuse in your application. So what I do now to reuse that is actually I go to CSS, I copy it, and I will add it to my form HTML file. And next, what I do is I open an HTML div, because I will put that in a div container. So here is my div, and now I go to the HTML of my div. I go to this UIverse, and I get to the HTML, and I copy and paste it here. And this, okay, this can stay. And you can see that with that little effort, I can easily start reusing a nice design that was created and just shared with everyone else. And you can reuse that in your WEB Core applications. If there are no questions on UI, I would like to continue to show you something in connection with databases. I explained that for databases, typically you will create the REST API, you will communicate via the REST API with your database. There is also an alternative where we have a public shared database that is already hosted for you, and that is our own stellards.io. So that is a database in the cloud that already comes with a REST API, and that you can actually easily consume from your WEB Core applications. To do that, I'll create once again a new WEB Core application. I'll not save this application. Okay, and let's save this to a new folder here in projects, webinar web, and we call this folder DB. Okay, I save my application, and now we'll have a look how we can work with databases from the web client application. Here, we will consume a REST API that stellards.io already provides for us, instead of having to write the REST API ourselves. And how we deal with data client side is actually very similar to how you do it in a VCL application. What I will add to the form is a DB and DB navigator like this. So DB grid, DB navigator, and what I also add is a data source. And the data set in this case will come from stellards. So we have the web Stellar Data Store client data set. And so we connect the data set to the data source, and we connect the data source to our two DB aware controls like this. And so what I do now, I need to give the authentication for this client dataset to work with the REST API. I will use the fastest way to do that to have this all done in the scope of this webinar. So here we see the stellards.io application interface. And here you see the tables that are hosted in my account on this public data in the cloud. These are my tables. And the access to my tables, I can do that through OAuth2 authentication and authorization. I can also do that via API keys. And I will add an access token, a world of web. Here it is not really important that it will only be valid for 30 minutes. And I create my access token. here it is. That is what I can use here as an access token for my client dataset. And the next thing that I need to do is then connect my dataset, make it active. So I change the caption of my button. Where is the caption here? Connect. And the only thing to do for connecting is actually setting this active property to true. And what I also want to do, let's make this grid a little bit bigger and also enable editing in my grid. So under options, I set go editing to true, and I run my application. So here's my application. I click on connect, and I think this, let's see what happens. I'm not sure why. Of course, that is quite stupid that I overlook to specify what table I want to access. You've seen that I had the cars table in my account. So here's the tables. Here I see cars, and here I see the metadata of my cars table, and here I see the actual data in my cars table. So now I specified the table name. So now I expect this to work, of course. Let's see. Let's run this application. And here it is in the browser. I click on connect, and you can see now that the data from StellarDS IO cloud database is in my DB grid. So I have the DB navigator, and I can work with this data. And to show you that I can really edit, let's change this to the planet Uranus and post it on the database. What I do now is move to here, stellards.io, and I will go to the next page, previous page, and you can see here that the name here was effectively changed to Uranus. So it worked, it did the update on my cloud data in stellards.io. The point is that other than here, specifically the web Stellar Data Store client dataset, we have a regular dataset. We also have an Xdata dataset that connects immediately to an Xdata server. And as such, when you create your web client applications for WEB Core, the behavior to deal with databases is very similar to a VCL application where you also bind controls, DB-aware controls, to data sets, to a data store, and this way can directly work with data from your database via a REST API server in between, but still, and client side, it is still dealing with data sets, performing actions on data sets, and in this way work on the data on your central database server or some cloud data server like stellards.io. And here I see a question, is it possible to enhance the look and feel of the DB grid to Bootstrap, and how is that done? The grid offers several settings that allow you to customize the CSS, because that styling actually is all done through CSS. And here you can see that the DB grid has the element class name, has the element table class name. So these are the places where you can already set Bootstrap classes on the DB grid to be used. In addition, if you want to further fine-tune, this grid also has the event on get cell class, and that is triggered for every cell in the grid. And the class name is here a var parameter, and that allows you to, for example, on a column level, row level, whatever, or highlight specific data in a specific way, to do that via putting a specific CSS class on a cell in the grid. So at grid level, you can add CSS classes to it, but also at cell level. And that is how you can use the power of CSS to further make the look and feel of your control better. That is how you can do this. And I would like to round off with hardware access. Hardware access, where I referred to using Bluetooth. And let's have a look where I think it is, no, it's no longer in my favorite or recent projects. So I will have to look where this particular demo is. I believe it's here. No, or maybe under basics, Bluetooth. Here it is. Here is the demo that I want to demonstrate. Okay, so what do we have? We have a Bluetooth-enabled sensor tag, and I'll look to turn it on. It is actually turned on now. I'm not sure if you can see that there is a LED blinking, meaning that Bluetooth is enabled. And over Bluetooth, this sensor tag can communicate temperature, the light intensity here of this room, and also the humidity. If I have a look, remove that to Bluetooth devices on my Windows machine, my sensor tag should be among them. Here you see that Windows recognized my sensor tag. That's the one we will be using now. So and here I have my web Bluetooth component. That is the component through which we will perform the Bluetooth communication with this device. So let's run this application. And why is it failing? That's a little bit strange. I'm not sure why that is happening. Let's try again. No. Okay, that is very strange, but the solution to strange problems is to restart the IDE, which is the common solution for solving software problems. So let's restart it. It's taking some time to restart my IDE, but it's coming. This actually is something from Texas Instruments. And so you can purchase this and play with it. So here's my Bluetooth application. Okay, and let's try again now. And that looks better. Here it is running in my browser. And now I select connect to device. You see that it is seeing all kinds of devices, but here, this is the device that we want to connect to or pair with. It is pairing now with this Bluetooth device. And as you can see, at this very moment, it achieved to retrieve the temperature. Yes, it's hot here in the office in Belgium, 28 degrees Celsius. Humidity is also quite high. And here is the light intensity. Actually, I can prove that this is real, that this is live, that this is no fake thing. If I would hold this in my hands to shield the light, you can see that the light, of course, is immediately changing. So that's showing how it's real. I can even, there is a LED on this device. So you can see that I can put this LED on and off also via my web application. So showing you how you can actually also interface with Bluetooth devices directly out of the box from a WEB Core application. And with that, I covered my introduction to web applications, the world of web with TMS WEB Core. And so I invite you, if you have not tried it yet, to download the fully functional trial version of WEB Core and play with it. And there is now some more time left for Q&A. If you have any question, then put it in the chat box, and then I'll try to handle it. I'm checking the chat box, but at this moment, I see no more questions appear. Know that at all times you can contact us via email, via the support center, if you have any further questions on WEB Core, or actually there is something else that I can show you if you are interested. I can also show you, maybe if one of you wants to see FNC integrated in WEB Core, I can spend 5 more minutes on that. Anyone wants to see that? Just give a little sign in the chat box, and I see an overwhelming yes. So let's do that. Let's do that. There is a question: is the Bluetooth demo source available? Yes, the full source code of the demo that I have shown is part of TMS WEB Core, so you can play with it yourself. People want to see FNC in TMS WEB Core, so let's just do that. So FNC is our range of controls that is literally running everywhere. It runs in a VCL application, in a FireMonkey application. It runs on Windows, Mac, iOS, Linux, and Android. And it runs also in the scope of a web application. I have installed, as you can see here, the FNC UI pack. And if you have installed the FNC UI pack, you automatically also have FNC Core. So that means that all the components from the FNC UI pack are available here on your tool palette. There is something important to realize, that while doing this webinar here today, I have been working all the time with the web form designer. So this designer is actually behind the scenes a web engine that renders our HTML, CSS all via this web engine. And this is an option. This is an option that you can select in the WEB Core options. And so here under options, there is this setting. Let me have a look here. Web designer. So I have set it to true. By default, it is actually false. And when it is false, we actually use the VCL form designer just at design time for working, creating WEB Core applications. When you have the classic form designer, the VCL form designer as the form designer for your web applications, and you have installed FNC components, all FNC components will by default be in your tool palette, will be usable in your web applications. When you have turned on the web designer, as I did, what is actually needed as an additional step is compile the web package for the FNC controls so that the web designer also can see the FNC components and use these FNC components. You can also actually see that in the WEB Core options. If I go under options, I see it's not you can actually see this here under installed packages, and here FNC UI pack for TMS WEB Core. And that is the package that actually creates a package of JavaScript code from our FNC controls, and that JavaScript code is actually what is responsible for running in that web engine that is used as the web form designer in the Delphi IDE. And so what I want to say is that if you want to use the FNC controls with this web form designer, know that you also have to separately install the web FNC package in the IDE, and at that point you will see these controls available. What I will do now is add the FNC planner on the form. So this is our FNC planner, and it's actually here now running in the web engine, but it's exactly the same. You have all properties that are also available in VCL or FireMonkey applications. So you can change this in every detailed items of the planner. Here, these 5 items, you can see them in the collection editor. So you work with that FNC control just like you would work with it in a VCL or FireMonkey application. So now I compile that application, and it launches the browser, and you can see our FNC planner running in the browser, and the interaction with our planner is like it is in a native application, exactly the same. So, for example, our FNC data grid, which offers quite a lot more features than the DB grid that is part of TMS WEB Core, like filtering, grouping, visual grouping, all these kinds of things. The FNC data grid is actually also something that you can use in your FNC, in your TMS WEB Core application. So let's see the data grid, for example. You can also drop it on the form and use it with the data binder, etc., in your web application. So every FNC component you can also use in your web applications, and that, I think, extends the number of components that are available for TMS WEB Core with a couple of 100 extra components that you have. And you can see how seamless it is to work with them from a TMS WEB Core application. So I hope that you like that extra part here in the webinar. And with that, if there are no more questions, we are rounding off this webinar. I want to thank you for being here.